Cam Newton's circumstance has to be by far one of the most fascinating and unusual circumstances that have ever fallen upon a number one overall pick since, I want to say, Drew Bledsoe, because like Drew Bledsoe, who was the quarterback that Tom Brady replaced, Cam Newton also was on the Carolina Panthers for 8 years. He was also a number one overall pick, and he also got cut or left the Carolina Panthers as a result of his injuries. But there's an even more fascinating problem here, because as soon as Drew Bledsoe hit the free agent market, teams were trying to sign him. But when you look at Cam Newton, that's not necessarily the case at all. So the question I have to ask you guys is, why? As we cut to the intro, please let me know in the comment section why you think Cam Newton isn't being signed as we dive into this analysis in today's video. Cue the music. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Your boy Microphone back again with another uploading. And guys, really quickly before we start the content, I wanted to let you guys know I will be live streaming tonight on Twitch. I live stream on Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, and Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Pacific time. Typically, we do Madden modded simulations, like simulating from the 2010 season to the 2020 season. We get to see all the players redrafted again. I have some crazy mods I want to show you guys, so make sure you're followed on Twitch. And let's discuss Cam Newton, because we all know Cam Newton had a phenomenal and inspiring rise to his career after being an afterthought at the University of Florida because, well, he was backing up Tim Tebow. Cam Newton also was arrested on felony charges of burglary, larceny, and obstruction of justice on an accusation of stealing a laptop computer. And as a result of that, he had to transfer to a community college called Blinn College. Cam Newton would dominate at community college, and eventually he would transfer to Auburn University. In his lone year at Auburn, he was able to beat out Andrew Luck for the Heisman Trophy and also win a national championship. As a result of that, the Carolina Panthers just couldn't pass up on the opportunity to make him their franchise quarterback, and he did put up a phenomenal rookie season, as he would throw for over 4,000 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, and 17 interceptions, but he would also put up over 700 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns just by scrambling, establishing himself as one of the premier dual threat quarterbacks in the NFL at the time. And the sky was the limit for Cam Newton because he was only 22. The next year, the Panthers were able to draft Luke Kuechly, and it appeared as if the Panthers had a captain on the offensive side of the field and the defensive side of the field. They would ride their offense and try to control games through their potent rushing attack. And then on the defensive side of the field, you had Luke Kuechly alongside a couple of other stud defensive players. Eventually, they would go on and find a diamond in the rough in Josh Norman, but that wouldn't happen until way later. And that's how Carolina would dominate games. They would control the clock and they would suffocate other teams with their defenses. We'd see the absolute peak of Cam Newton's powers during the 2015 season, where he would not only throw for 35 touchdowns, but he would throw for 3,800 yards, and he would also rush for over 600 yards and 10 touchdowns on the ground. The Carolina Panthers would make it to the Super Bowl and face the Denver Broncos, and ultimately they would lose. But not without some controversy from Cam Newton. A lot of people like to point the finger at him for, not jumping on this fumble or giving more effort. I personally don't really perceive this play as that, because if you're in the Super Bowl, you're doing whatever it takes to win. But I feel like there's a little bit of a backstory to this as well. Think about it. Cam Newton is in the Super Bowl. He sees a football right on the field, and if he's able to recover it, his team is able to maintain a possession. But he doesn't seem to really be going for it. Have you ever stopped to wonder why he didn't really go for it? His former teammate Mike Tolbert gave us an excerpt that could possibly clear up the entire situation. According to Mike Tolbert, the entire time that Cam Newton was dealing with a shoulder injury, he was being completely mismanaged by the Carolina Panthers. And according to Tolbert, he said they've been doing him wrong timing-wise for the past 2 or 3 years, if you ask me. It goes back to his shoulder surgery. Everyone knew his shoulder was messed up in the middle of the year 2 years ago, but they still waited until the offseason to get ready to start to have shoulder surgery. It makes no sense and the timing's off. Newton was dealing with this shoulder injury all the way going back to the Super Bowl run in 2015, and he struggled throughout the 2016 season as he underwent rotator cuff surgery on his throwing shoulder in the middle of March. And ever since then, Cam Newton's injury has lingered since. His accuracy wasn't really the greatest to begin with, but it clearly was on the decline when he came back in 2019. He looked okay in 2018, but he was more of a dink and dunk quarterback as he was able to complete 68% of his passes, which is the greatest completion percentage of his entire career. Cam Newton has always hovered around the 50s in terms of completion percentage, and in 2016, he only completed 52.9% of his passes. That is absolutely abysmal. So essentially, Cam Newton got relegated to a scrambling dink and dunk quarterback, but the problem is, if you're a dink and dunk quarterback, you're not really stretching the field much, which means the opportunities you have to scramble are significantly less. The Carolina Panthers saw no point in waiting around for Cam Newton to fix his injury problems, and they decided to just cut ties with him altogether. Okay, Mike, well, you gave us a history on Cam Newton's injury. Well, why don't teams want to sign him and at least give him a chance in spite of this injury? You have the New England Patriots, who are going into the season with a 4th-round quarterback that they drafted a year ago. You have the Dallas Cowboys, who have a starting quarterback that has a very similar play style to Cam Newton in Dak Prescott that is currently in the midst of a contract dispute. And instead of signing Cam Newton, the Dallas Cowboys opted to sign Andy Dalton. Why? Why would the Jets sign Joe Flacco over Cam Newton? Why would the Saints sign Jameis Winston over Cam Newton? Why would the Raiders sign Marcus Mariota over Cam Newton to be a backup as well? It just doesn't make a lot of sense, because I feel like the proper coach would be able to take Cam Newton and potentially put him in a scenario where he could succeed and be the best version of himself. So why isn't any general manager taking a chance on Cam Newton? Well, there's 2 issues here. The first one is, in order for Cam Newton to be a backup, he's going to have to be okay with just being a backup. He's going to have to be okay with being in the backup role. He needs to accept the fact that he's no longer the player that he once was, and he needs to understand that he needs to accept a backup role to rebuild his stock, to rehab his throwing shoulder in order to be the best version of himself when he comes back for either the team he wants to play for or for the next team he wants to play for. So if you put him as a backup quarterback to, say, Dak Prescott, or even better yet, if you put him as a backup quarterback to Jarrett Stidham, automatically the fan bases and the media is going to stir up a controversy where they assume eventually Cam Newton is going to try to become the QB1 of that roster. And the drama isn't worth the reward you would get if Cam Newton was to rebuild himself and become the best version of himself again. You don't want to damage Jarrett Stidham's confidence if you truly believe in him like Bill Belichick does. You don't want the media to distort the narrative like they do every single time the Dallas Cowboys make a move. If he was to sign with the Dallas Cowboys, think about it. When Andy Dalton signed with the Cowboys, I didn't say this, but there was a handful of analysts that said Andy Dalton is insurance in case Dak Prescott holds out, or the Cowboys are going to just have Andy Dalton as the starter in order to give them leverage in a contract scenario. Could you imagine if the Cowboys opted to sign a former NFL MVP, a player that is just a repaired shoulder away, which is a big thing, by the way. Andrew Luck retired over shoulder concerns, but it's still a big thing. But Cam Newton is a repaired shoulder away from actually being a threat to any quarterback's starting job. But here's the worst part. On top of that, Cam Newton has already shown a horrible version of himself this past year. He played in about 2 games, and in those 2 games, he had a 56% completion percentage. He threw 0 touchdowns and 1 interception. He was missing throws all over the place, and then he called it for the entire season. As a result of that, an anonymous general manager said that Cam Newton's decline is absolutely evident. And he also says, I'm not saying that he can't bounce back, but we were able to tell that he clearly isn't the player that he once was. So with everything I gave you, the two main reasons why Cam Newton isn't being signed right now is one, he's not good enough to be a starting quarterback, and two, he's not worth the headache and the trouble and the media circus if he is signed up as a backup quarterback. So with that being said, where should Cam Newton sign and what's the market for Cam Newton like? There is only one team in the entire NFL that could use a player like Cam Newton's services, and I'm going to give you like a couple seconds to guess what that team is. Give you like 3, 2, 1. That team is clearly the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have a very, very old quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger that was out due to an injury, and with all due respect to Big Ben, I really don't have a lot of faith, and I hope I'm wrong. I don't ever wish injury upon people. I don't have a lot of faith in him sticking around an entire season, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are too good of a roster to just give up and throw away a season if their starting QB is out for the entire season. On top of that, who's to say that Ben Roethlisberger doesn't come back and have a season that was similar to the one that Phillip Rivers had a year ago? So with that being said, they could have Cam Newton sit behind Big Ben for about a year or two, or just as his backup. Whenever Father Time knocks on Big Ben's door, Cam Newton could get up and try to see how he's doing in his rehabilitation and really test his skills again. I do think Cam Newton is going to become a starting quarterback again. I feel like he's just too talented not to. I feel like he's too motivated not to. But if he wants to get to that situation, if he wants to get to that point where he's starting as a quarterback again, no, I don't think he's going to be NFL MVP, but I think he will be NFL Comeback Player of the Year. I do think he could win a Super Bowl in his career. If Peyton Manning could come back after being sold off and cast away by the Indianapolis Colts, join the Denver Broncos, have a super team built around him, despite his arm essentially becoming a noodle after a year, bear in mind, the year that Peyton Manning was the most dominant with the Denver Broncos, they got blown out in the Super Bowl by the Seattle Seahawks. It wasn't until his final year, where Peyton Manning could barely throw the ball, that the Denver Broncos won a Super Bowl with him. I think the same thing could happen with Cam Newton. I know he's not as adept at reading defenses or throwing the deep ball as Peyton Manning was, but I feel like if he is in a situation, if he's in the right situation, as backup quarterback to the Steelers, maybe even the Ravens, just in case if something bad falls upon Lamar Jackson, teaming up with Greg Roman could be good for him. I feel like if he's patient with his rehabilitation and is motivated and just buys into whatever the team's philosophy is and doesn't try to take anyone's position, then I feel like Cam Newton still has plenty of years of football to play. And I feel like it's only a matter of time before he gets another chance. The guy's only 31 years old. If Drew Bledsoe could get a job from the Buffalo Bills after he was cast aside from the New England Patriots, then of course another team's going to give Cam Newton a chance. Let me know what you guys think about my take in the comment section down below. Aside from that, I'm your boy Microphone, and I'll catch you guys in our next upload.